Right, thank you. Welcome to the Wednesday, October 25th, 2023 meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission. We'll start with a call to order. Sorry, we'll start with a roll call. Commissioner Van Nyman.
Present.
Commissioner Aparna.
Present.
Commissioner Chevron.
Present.
Commissioner Woodyear will be joining us shortly. Excused tonight are Chair Nichols and Commissioner Nueva Camina. If we could move to the approval of the previous meeting minutes and summaries. We have meeting minutes from September 27th, 2023, and a meeting summary from October 11th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, thank you.
Aye.
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 Right?
Susan, point of order. Approval of the agenda is item number 2.
Oh, let's do that also. If we could have approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. And I would also like to thank the members of the staff who are here tonight. We have Kim Dietz, Jeff Churchill, Chris Wyatt, and Glenn Coyle. Thank you for taking your time to be here. If we could go now to the items from the audience, I would like to remind everyone that we are not entertaining political comments tonight, so nothing about the upcoming election. We will start with David Morton.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Morton, 19934 Northeast Union Hill Road, Redmond 98053. Addressing homelessness, drug use, and crime in Redmond is a complex challenge that requires a multifaceted approach involving government agencies, nonprofit organizations, the community, and law enforcement. Here are some strategies to manage these issues. Affordable housing. Homelessness is often linked to a lack of affordable housing. Redmond can invest more in affordable housing initiatives, including transitional housing and permanent supportive housing for those experiencing homelessness. Homelessness outreach and services. Provide outreach and support services for homeless individuals, connecting them with housing options, mental health and addiction treatment, and job training programs. Drug rehabilitation programs. Develop or support drug rehabilitation programs that provide treatment, counseling, and support to individuals struggling with addiction. This can help reduce drug use and its associated problems. Mental health services. Ensure access to mental health services to address the underlying causes of homelessness and drug addiction. Collaborate with mental health providers to offer support to those in need. Community policing. Implement community policing strategies that build positive relationships between law enforcement and the community. Encourage officers to engage with residents and businesses, focusing on problem solving rather than solely on enforcement. Crime prevention programs. Support crime prevention programs such as neighborhood watch groups, after-school activities for youth, and mentorship programs. An engaged community can help deter criminal activities. Substance abuse education. Launch educational campaigns about the dangers of drug use and offer resources for those seeking help. School-based programs and community events can be effective in raising awareness. Collaboration with nonprofits. Partner with local nonprofit organizations that specialize in homeless services, addiction treatment, and crime prevention. These organizations often have expertise and resources that can be leveraged. Diversion programs. Establish diversion programs for low-level offenders, particularly those with substance abuse issues or mental health challenges. These programs can provide treatment and support instead of incarceration. Reentry services develop programs to support individuals leaving the criminal justice system, helping them find employment and housing. This reduces the risk of recidivism. Data collection and analysis collect and analyze data related to homelessness, drug use, and crime to better understand the issues and allocate resources effectively. Legal aid services provide access to legal aid services for individuals at risk of homelessness or entangled in the criminal justice system. This can help address legal barriers to housing and employment. Public safety investments invest in the training and resources of law enforcement agencies to ensure that they are well equipped to handle complex social issues, including mental health crises. And finally, community engagement. Encourage the active involvement of community members in addressing these issues, as they often have valuable insights and can contribute to local solutions. Addressing homelessness, drug use, and crime is a long-term endeavor that requires ongoing commitment and collaboration. Tailoring solutions to Redmond's specific needs and characteristics is crucial for success, and it's important to adapt strategies as circumstances change over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Keith Hubrath. If you could start just by introducing yourself and your address.
Hey, good evening. My name is Keith Hubrath, 9008 4th Avenue Northwest, Seattle, Washington, 98117. My name is Keith. As I said, I work for Goodman Real Estate. As you may recall, we are the owners and the developers of a new mixed-use apartment building within the Proctor Willows master plan development at 124th and Willows Road in coordination with Tri-Point Homes. Our portion of the development includes 195 apartment homes and roughly 22,000 square feet of commercial retail space. And I'm here tonight to speak in support of issue D.1 in the issues matrix on your agenda tonight for the annual code rewrite. Issue D.1 would amend the current zoning language within the Northwest Design District to allow for medical uses labeled as ambulatory or outpatient services that would include things like dentists and primary care physicians. Since starting our construction on our project, we had received many inquiries from medical and outpatient providers about leasing that retail space, and we believe that those uses are consistent with the complete neighborhood spirit within the original zoning of the Northwest Design District. However, we were a little bit surprised to learn that was omitted from that zone when that use was omitted from the design district when it was created. Last month, on September 26, our land use attorney, Courtney Flora with McCullough Hill, had provided a memo from our traffic engineer, Transpo Group, that demonstrated that vehicle trip generation and demand from medical use was within the ranges currently allowed within the Northwest Design District. At last month's meeting, we greatly appreciated the positive feedback and discussion that happened here, and we're encouraged by that. We're also pleased to see that staff comments in support of the amendment on the issue matrix is consistent with our goals. So we anticipate finishing construction and occupying our project in the first quarter of next year. And we believe that clarifying the allowed uses in the annual code rewrite will help us create a successful project that will benefit our neighborhood and our surrounding communities. I wanted to say once again that I appreciate your attention in this and look forward to delivering a quality project to our neighborhoods. And I'm here tonight if you have any questions that I can help answer or address. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, our next item up is the Redmond 2050 monthly briefing with Jeff Churchill.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. It's nice to be with you this evening, and it is my great pleasure also to welcome to the table tonight Cindy Joffrey and Adam Coleman, who are respectively the chair and the vice chair of the Redmond 2050 Community Advisory Committee. We normally do this briefing at the end of the meeting, and it's usually 5 or 10 minutes, but tonight we have a half an hour devoted to it on the agenda so that Cindy and Adam can share with you the work of the Community Advisory Committee thus far, and so that there's an opportunity for discussion and questions. I think our collective hope is that you get a good sense of what has kind of risen to the top in those discussions as an input to your work as you're studying the policies and making recommendations to the City Council. So I'm going to kick it off with just a brief introduction about what is the Community Advisory Committee for Redmond 2050. It really has 3 purposes here in the hexagons. It's to provide input and advice to staff on the goals and policies that are part of Redmond 2050. Committee members are also community ambassadors, talking to their friends and neighbors about what's going on with the plan update. And they have spent many, many hours reviewing the same kinds of draft documents that have come to the Planning Commission. In fact, typically they're presented first to the Community Advisory Committee before they come to the Planning Commission. So as you think about your work at reviewing Redmond 2050 documents, it's been a similar work effort at the Community Advisory Committee. The committee meets once a month, which means those meetings are jam-packed full of content. And they have been at it since late 2020 when we started really with the existing conditions and on all the way through to where we are today. And in the next few months, actually, they're gonna get to wrap up their work, and we'll have some kind of party for sure. So I'm going to turn it over to the 2 of them to talk about who is the Community Advisory Committee.
Sure.
You have to turn on your mic so it's green.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Singy Joffrey again. I wanted to share a little bit about the CAC. Certainly, like all of us are volunteers, much like you all. And many of us, this is our first engagement with local government. And really, I think for many of us, we just want to positively influence the community and find some way to give back. And so in terms of who's on the CAC, I think some of you have been on the CAC, Aparna and Tara, but also from the community, we have everybody from high school students all the way up to, some of our retired community members who've been living in the community for, over 60 years. We have people who, maybe only work here, some people who live in the city, others who, for various reasons, have lived here in various times of their life. So I thought maybe for just to give you a sense of, putting a face to it, that Adam and I could talk a little bit at least about why we joined the CAC and a little bit about our background. So for me personally, I've been living in Redmond for about 8 years. I first came to Redmond as an intern, so as a university student. And over time, I've been lived in everything from, a small apartment to renting a townhome to eventually purchasing my first home and, experiencing Redmond in very different ways through that. And so, and for me, personally, I'm also really interested in seeing youth get really involved in our process. And so that's been something that I've been passionate about on CAC, is trying to get more youth involved. We had some students come and present to us about, things that they were passionate about. And I think also just thinking very long term, I really want us to, consider the ways that technology will change our city, not only from a sustainability perspective, but in the ways that, our citizens interact with it, the built environment and stuff. So that's a little bit about me. Adam.
Yeah. Thank you for having us this evening. I just wanted to say first, I wanted to thank Jeff and the whole team for, all the investment of time they put in. Yeah, we spend a bunch of time, but they spend a bunch of time after hours with us. So I just want to say thank you. It's been really, really fun and great. For me personally, just echoing a little bit what Zini was saying, a lot of the things you said resonate with me. My background is, hopefully you can still tell, is I was originally from the UK, and I looked up tonight. My hometown in the UK was inaugurated in 853 AD, and I bring that up because I really wish that my town had a 30-year plan in the 60s, like we're having here, because it's not great anymore, and I wish it was better. And so I share that because bit of humor, but at the same time, there's a serious note, which is for me, being involved here actually was driven a bit by that. And I look at what we can do in the city and the changes that are happening. And, 30 years is a long time. And how do we make Redmond fit for the 21st century? And frankly, fit for our, our son is 18, and kids around here who want to stay here and live here and actually grow here. What's it going to be like for them? And this is a starting point for that. So that, for me, is kind of the primary reasons why. Zinyi, back to you.
I'm going to continue with a little bit about process, kind of how the CAC fits into the bigger Redmond 2050 effort and what the Community Advisory Committee has been up to over the last few years. So this is not exhaustive. This is a schematic. There are many different elements of the community that are involved in this effort, and I've distilled it into 6 boxes because that's how many can fit on the slide. The Community Advisory Committee provides input to staff primarily, but also to the Planning Commission through change matrices and issues matrices that you've seen, also being here tonight, but also just in that what we receive from the Community Advisory then gets reflected back to the Planning Commission, and also in that same way to the City Council. Community members are providing direct input. I really missed an arrow here. They provide direct input to staff at our engagement events and through email. They're providing direct input to you during items from the audience, during hearings. They're providing direct input to the City Council in the same way. And then we also visit other boards and commissions, staff, the Parks and Trails Commission, Human Services Commission, Design Review Board. So they are providing input to the process in that way. And then we are providing input to you and to the City Council. So as you think of the flow of information and input, like that's a very simplified version of what's going on. So what the Community Advisory Committee has been up to, at the very beginning, there was a lot of just kind of framework setting, ground setting, kind of what is planning in Washington State? What is it that we're here to do? What's required? What are we trying to accomplish? Who is our community? What is our community? What is Redmond today? Who is Redmond today? So a lot about community profile, existing conditions across a range of topics. You may remember those existing conditions reports from a couple of years ago. Community Advisory Committee also read those. When we started, we were asking the question, what should we be even looking at in this plan update? Seems like a very long time ago now, but that's really where we started is here's the plan we have, here's the community today, what is it that we need to be looking at for the future? And then big picture questions like growth is coming, where should it go, and what should it look like? So there are some of the earlier days in the life of the CAC. And then as we moved forward beyond what should we look at, what are the policy considerations that are on the table, and we started, after gaining input around that, started drafting. And so over the last year and a half, the CAC has been looking every month at drafts of various topics, various element updates, starting with the ones in gold and tan, which are part of phase 1, and then moving through into the ones that are kind of gray or gray-blue. And as of, I think it was last month, we got through at least a first draft of everything, which was a major milestone for the committee. So that condenses a whole lot of meetings and input into a couple of slides, which doesn't do it justice, which is why we're not going to stop there. So I'm going to turn it back to Zinyi and Adam to talk about what some of the major themes were on opportunities to make a difference and also challenges facing Redmond going forward.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, like Jeff said, it's hard to put 2 years of thoughts into a couple slides, but I think there's definitely a couple of things that come up over and over again, as we talk about all the various elements, a couple of themes. And so we just want to hit on the ones that seem most important to our community members. One, I think, is all around what makes Redmond unique today. And I think a lot of us, think of that as a very nature-based, sort of like small community where you can walk around and feel, like it's very safe to walk, you can bike and, have that kind of environment. And so as we think about how much density is coming into the city, I think, we'd love for that to be preserved. And so I think a lot of thought as we look at the various, city plans around Overlake and around downtown, there was a lot of talk around how do we maintain this walkability or pedestrian-only kind of areas and do that in a sustainable way. And perhaps like reroute, some really busy traffic through some of those areas. So that's come up again and again as we revisit elements. Other parts are, how do we kind of make, various micro communities, in Redmond unique as well. And so I think we've spent a lot of time talking about community design elements. And I think, there's a real desire to be unique and not just, like a stamp of Bellevue or, one of these like other bigger cities, and just follow their path. Like I think there's a real desire to, have a very vibrant arts and like culture centers and, have a lot of things to offer for our community. And so that's come up again and again. And certainly, I think when we think about integrating nature into our community, it's not just about having that as like a beautifying kind of aspect of it, but certainly a lot of people feel very strongly about, sustainability goals and how do we continue to have not only the things that are inside the city be beautiful, but the parts around our city continue to be beautiful. And so, that's definitely been a theme throughout.
Yeah, so thank you. The other part, and we up here in talking about inclusion, the thing that we found, I think there's a real yin and yang between opportunity and challenges. The things are linked in many respects, I think, as we probably all very know that very well. Land use and zoning rules, we talked quite a bit about that, like how does that work and how do we make sure that there's affordable housing and all that kind of stuff. That sort of cultural and economic diversity that's here and growing while ensuring all of this is a challenge. It's a challenge for a city when I think we were all on the committee surprised when, actually, Jeff, you can probably correct me here, but was it 20,000 units in the next 30 years? Did I get that right?
Uh, 20,000 is our target through 2044 for housing units.
Yeah. So that's a huge growth in just people and land use. So making sure we do that in a way that is inclusive for people who want to come in and live here. There's the affordability part of it, but there's also all the other parts with transportation. So we did have some entertaining conversations around like how do you make transportation in 2050, where we don't know what the innovations are, work for people in different places. My wife and our son, we live on Education Hill, so we could walk a mile down and a mile back, which is great, but it would be nice, when we get a little older, that we don't necessarily need to do that with a floating car or something like that, I don't know. But we had a lot of conversations around what does that look like. But there's a serious point as well, which is how do we sort of make that ability for people to go down to light rail? Like, how do we make that easier for people to use? And then what's the balance of that with, car use, et cetera? So that's part of it. And then, again, inclusive mobility. How do we make sure downtown, we're enabled, it's very much what Zinnia is talking about in terms of walkability, people that, that need assistance. How do we make sure we have that right mix when we've got 20,000 more housing units being built and the people that would be as part of that. So there's a lot of innovations that we don't know yet. Like 2050 is a long way away. Things move fast, as Ferris Bueller might say. So I think that that's one of the things for us is around innovation, which may help, particularly in this area. Do you want me to just touch on the challenges, or Jeff, do you want to just go ahead? Do I keep going, or do you want to?
Do you want to cover the transportation on this slide?
Yeah. So the transportation piece here as well is, we talked about where will cars go, but it's really sort of the access to light rail as well in particular, the implications of people numbers, congestion, etc. All of that mixed together downtown, and we made decisions were made 30 years before about having that density. So how do we think about that? What's the best way of balancing those pieces? And then I'll talk about maybe the social and cultural stuff because it is connected, and then Zinni maybe touch on the environmental pieces. And so on the safety and social cultural piece, how do we keep a welcome attitude and that concern for one another when the place gets bigger and there's more people and there's more congestion and all those sorts of things. So therefore, like, how do we think about improving affordability and then also balancing and addressing homelessness with greater people numbers? That's obviously something that's come up a decent amount in conversations we've had. And that's also connected a bit to transportation. So when light rail arrives, what does that mean in terms of how we support people who need that kind of support, and the impact we may not currently anticipate with light rail coming into downtown, both in a positive way and things that we need to kind of be concerned about and be ready for, if that's the right word for it. And then finally, sort of retaining the ability to think about how do you reinvent Redmond in the future when things change. We went from CDs to people having an iPod. Like, how does that work when it comes to things like transportation, when it comes to more high-tech type scenarios of how we deal with lighting and downtown and all those sorts of things? Cindy?
Yeah, and I think some of the other challenges we've talked about quite a lot in the Redmond 2050 community is, we have all of these like really, I think, I forgot what you had called it, but there's like a plan at the city level, right, where we want to hit certain goals by like 2030 or something like that, right? We have really aggressive goals, but I think, even when we look at the policy level, I think, people sometimes felt like, oh, maybe there's not enough urgency in the way that we're wording some of these policies, to match that like ambitious of a goal. And so that was something that was brought up. But I think on the flip side of that, one of the tensions that we see is, we also have, this desire to improve affordability. And one of the real concerns is that the more we kind of like invest in like high tech, environmentally sustainable things, does that make, maybe certain buildings not affordable for our community? And so trying to find that right balance of, affordability along with, going really aggressively, with our environmental goals. I think that's come up as like one potential tension. And I think, and again, like none of us are really like, city planners. And so we don't necessarily have the answers to that. But I think, when we see certain things happening in the community, for instance, I think one particular thing was brought up, like we see a lot of these, smaller homes being demolished and, replaced with, multifamily units, which I think, people are generally like very supportive of on the CAC. But the concern is like, some of these multifamily units are actually bigger than the original home that was there and more expensive. And so, how do we kind of, address, both things at the same time, right? Affordability along with wanting to kind of support density and wanting to support our environmental goals. And then I think I'll just touch on one more thing, which is one of the things that I think as we talk to the younger members of our community that they're really concerned about is how do we better support, mental health and things like that. And so one of the things we were really glad to see was I think it's an optional element that we could do was like this human services element, and Redmond chose to do it. And it was really interesting to kind of read about, Redmond's take on, how do we support community members in the best way that we can, especially with, the growing population age and, like the mental health issues that's been cropping up in schools as well. And so, so I think a lot of challenges in our future, but also I think a lot of desire to see good solutions for those. And I think, the other thing that Adam and I just talked about was there any element that we kind of felt like was missing, after going through all of these elements? And I think for me personally, it just kind of felt like, when we're looking so far in the future, is there some way to kind of start thinking about, the impacts of like some of the like latest like smart city, innovations in other cities that we're seeing, like what are the kind of like ideas and things like that we want to bring into Redmond and start kind of sketching out some of those ideas. And I don't know, like maybe that's not something that's typically put into a long-term plan, but it does feel like, since we're spending so much time envisioning the future, that there's not kind of like an element that's really touching on, really like big technology advancements that could impact our community.
Yeah, and I'd actually be able to pivot off of that too. I happen to have a friend who's a futurist. So he helps companies with using science fiction to think about where do their companies go. Big companies, and I was talking to him a bit about what we were doing here. And he said, how do you envision that, to the same point? And so the question that was missing for me a little bit, and maybe it's a little bit in terms of the work that I do, is like, I was trying to write that down, like in an overall way to describe how we want new visitors and residents to describe Redmond when they come here in 2050, right? Is it still the cycle capital of the Northwest? or is it something else? So how do we envision that? It's really hard to go from here to there, but what would we say to people and what would we want people to take away from that experience that maintains what's great about Redmond, but it's actually, a city for the 21st century that maybe want people to think differently about what the city is. So that was the thing that struck me, and certainly in talking to him, he was encouraging me to think a bit bigger, which is super helpful. But anyway, just share that. Thank you.
I think that's all we had today, but let me just close by saying, I think Adam's already thanked city staff, but I just want to say, I think a lot of us on the CAC have had such a positive experience because city staff are just honestly the best listeners that I've ever met around, being able to listen and really try to understand where all the different community members are coming from. And certainly the CAC is a very broad swath of the community, but even more so, I know, there's a lot of efforts to reach out to other parts of the community that aren't on the council. And so, a huge thank you to city staff and everybody involved.
So I just want to say thank you for all of your hard work and for coming here to present it. It's very clear that your fingerprints are all over the documents that we've been reading, and your feedback has really made a difference. I just want to open it up for questions if anyone has any. Commissioner Aparna.
Thank you both. I was there for some part of the CAC, so I saw you guys get started. Now, historic preservation's coming. We're not in 84380, but, we've got something coming. But my question to you would be, I understand that, the 30-year time frame seems very daunting, right? So the way I've been thinking about it, and I would love your thoughts on this, is looking at it from a perspective of being as flexible and as adaptable as possible, removing the barriers at the lowest level, and then letting it play out as things come in, right? But from a perspective of it being that flexible, does it seem too loosey-goosey to you guys? I mean, is it something that you have discussed at the CAC where you're saying, okay, let's keep this open-ended? And nobody likes ambiguity, so that's even worse, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've kind of struggled with the last 2 years is I think, Jeff and Glenn always have to remind us hey, the plan is not necessarily the policy itself. And so, I think there's definitely a desire to see concrete objectives and the numbers that back it up. I think, we hear that a lot. But I think, we also understand, right, that if you write things that are so constrained and, lists out, for instance, what we know is technology today, right? We want X number of solar panels or we want this, right? That just doesn't age well in 30 years. And so, so I think there is a balance, but I think where we'd like to see more specificity is in targets, and things like that. And then I think leaving the how a little bit more open, I think is some of the.
That is a really nice lens, because I think we can use that as a commission to parse things, because we also struggle with the same questions. It's just because we're sitting here doesn't mean we know anything more than you guys, okay? So it's just that we have to, I think as a city, is there any particular barrier or something that you see as a red flag right now as a barrier to opening our minds to something like hovering, cars or whatever? Is there some particular barrier that you would like to see removed?
I just want to just reflect back on your first question just quickly, if I can, because I think it might be related to this, which is, if I think back, I could think back what I was like in 1990 and what the world was like back then, unfortunately. And I think, well, would I have imagined the world of 2020? And absolutely not. But to Zinni's point, there are certain things that you put in place that are adaptable to those changing, whether it's technology, electric cars, internet, all those things. So it's the principles that, at the end of the day, that matter. The thing on the thing around targets. If you set targets for a short space of time over a 5-year period, that feels doable. But when you set targets that sort of 10 and 20 years out, it can suddenly feel a bit daunting. So thinking shorter term initially, I think is helpful. But as well as that, again, from an envisioning perspective, to your point about a question about how you think more broadly, ultimately, the world is very different. It was very different in 2020 than 1990, and people probably imagine some of these things, and people are saying you're crazy about that. Like, that's not the case. And in fact, innovation and other things are accelerating. So it's actually a time probably to do more of that while setting some of those shorter term targets. I don't know if you've got anything else that you wanted to kind of add thoughts on that.
Not on that, but I wanted to answer the second question.
Yeah, sure, yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of barriers or things that feel like a little bit constrained, I think, one of the things we've seen is there's, we kind of come at it with, some pre-constrained notions around sectors, it kind of sometimes feels like, or the way we zone things, right? We think about manufacturing as one industry now, right? Or we think about a particular industry. And I think just 30 years in the future, when we think about was content creation even, a very vast, number of employees that we would even think of today, 30 years ago. And so I think when we think about zoning or how we do think about how businesses are structured, I think sometimes that feels a little bit constrained to how we view our economy today. Other than that, I do feel most of the things we've been reading have been pretty open-ended in terms of how we achieve our sustainability targets or how we how we'll house people, right? It doesn't feel super limiting, the language we've used.
Yeah, and I think that one other quick thing I might add is first thing around this is around the pandemic. So again, we all started this in December 2020, and I don't think any of us would have expected that to happen 30 years ago. All the impact it's had over those 3 years and the way that it's changed the way people work and commute and lives in general. And so we don't know what that's going to look like over the next 30 years, but I think that people were able to adapt and in many respects in a positive way in some areas, and take advantage of that. So it goes back to that point of having principles, but being adaptable to either situations or opportunities. So that's the only thing for me, which that's a major shift in the way the city probably sees itself operating in, not the city itself, but people's movement. People going and picking up kids at 3 versus 5 at a very basic level, right? Hey, I don't have to wait till 5 o'clock to go and do that. So that changes the nature of how people are working, and there's lots of other impact areas that then is downstream from that. So,
thank you. Just one follow-up. I completely agree with you, and I really like how staff has put together the underlying principles, because I think those are timeless, right? When you talk about sustainability, we talk about equity, inclusion, those are timeless. So however we live and whatever comes our way, those we should not forget as first principles, right? That's how the city is planning it, and I think it's wonderful. So thank you again.
Any other questions? Commissioner Sheffrin?
Thank you. I really don't have a question other than just to express my appreciation for these few years of effort, because I imagine the learning curve for the two of you, not that it's insurmountable, you've managed to try to, you use the phrase adaptive, and that's clearly what's necessary in order to hear these voices, particularly trying to invite those who aren't really in the room to share, their perspectives, et cetera, because this is, daunting is almost an understatement, but I think just the ability to listen and then seek input from all the different ages, which I imagine were represented, and we're going to continue to do the work. And we've got an amazing staff, as you well know. So just again, an expression of appreciation for your efforts.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Commissioner Van Nymen?
So as a member of the CAC, I would just add, and you mentioned the youth. I don't know where those kids were recruited from, exactly what the process was, but they're amazing. And they really do provide, I just wanted to make sure you guys all understood, these kids rock it. And I've been in some of the small group breakouts with some of them, and they're just they are on the ball. So it's a really valuable experience, not just, all community members are welcome, and it's valuable for everybody, but I especially like watching the youth start early and participating and learning what's going on in their communities. So, however that recruiting process took place, that was amazing. I also wanted to say, you mentioned that the members of the committee don't necessarily live in Redmond, and I think that's really valuable. There are people who work in Redmond and live elsewhere, and so they have a very different perspective that I think is really valuable that they hear on the CAC.
Thank you. I had one additional question about the micro-communities. I'd love to hear more about what you were thinking in that particular area.
Yeah, I think when we kind of talked about, the different neighborhoods and kind of what we wanted out of the different neighborhoods, I think one of the ideas was that, today, for instance, if you go to Education Hill, like I think was one example you brought up, right? You really have to kind of like drive out of that community to get kind of like, maybe like your local coffee shop or, be able to kind of do some kind of like, shopping and things like that. And so I think, it was really a discussion around, how do we kind of make sure there's some amount of vibrancy, that's like in every community, and whether that means, allowing some amount of like businesses, how do we do that while respecting, people's desire for privacy. But, we kind of did like a bit of an envisioning, session, I think, where we talked about, okay, like, what do we want? Would it be okay to have a storefront running out of a garage? Or would it be okay to, put it on a street corner, but not, how do you actually like, when you like close your eyes and envision walking down the street, right? Like, what does that kind of feel like? And so I think we did that exercise for a couple of different neighborhoods. Education Hill was one. I think, there was some talk about like Overlake's going to go through huge transformation. So what does that kind of feel like? And I think it is a little bit of like an interesting point too, that we still want Redmond to have like an overall kind of like, vision and feel. But I think definitely there's like a lot of openness to like these little communities having, like very much something that's like unique, even about like the architecture or about, the types of businesses that run out of there. Yeah, I don't know if you had more to add.
Yeah, just, this is not political comment. I've done some canvassing around Redmond, and so having done that and going to different places really surprised me when I started it about how many different types of communities there are here. It's really surprised. I mean, I was really like, wow, there's this sort of housing and that sort of housing and in different places. Those are all micro-communities, right? And I didn't realize how much there was a difference around Redmond and how big it is in many respects. And because of that, again, sort of thinking about how do you bring those communities together, that, with living on Education Hill, it would be great to have somewhere where people could come and sort of be together, if it's a coffee shop or a local store. And I'm a bit more used to that coming from the UK. But then it's difficult to know, like, where do you put that? So, we went through this whole process, and I'm not sure whether we got to a great conclusion. But I think, again, the principles and the ideas are there. So in the future, with innovation, is there some other way of doing that, which is possible to do? I'm not too sure how you do that, but there's people smarter than me that could probably work it out, I'm sure. So.
I think the other thing too is I think there's, excitement around some of these communities being like grown organically, so for instance, say Sav had pitched to us like, okay, should we do an international district in Overlake because it's just kind of popped up as, like there's a lot of Chinese restaurants there and there's, that community has kind of built up there, and I think it does take some amount of city planning to really make it feel like formalized, but it's not like being forced on the community in that way. So I think, kind of like adapting to, what's kind of formed organically there as well was something, I think we talked about.
Yeah, it's not quite on topic, but not exactly on micro-communities. The other thing that when we started that I really appreciated was our opportunity to have input into how do we think about zones, like is Overlake the same as Redmond? Should it feel the same? And the sort of pathways in between. That part of the conversation I found fascinating to be able to have some input into whether it should be different or not. That was great, and some of the architecture and how people's perspectives on that, as well as obviously getting that from the community as a whole. So that was kind of a fun part, not really directly part of the question, but that was a kind of, for me, very interesting thing to be able to get involved with.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I think we'd all like to keep talking, but I'm supposed to keep it to 30 minutes. So thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we move to the next agenda item, the very last piece of the monthly update I wanted to share was that, as you know, last month we published a supplemental draft EIS, and the comment period closed last Friday. My recommendation request to the planning commissioners is that it's 600 pages. I don't necessarily expect you to read it, all of it anyway, but there are summary documents and there's a story map. And what's important, I think, for the Planning Commission is to understand kind of the major takeaways and findings from that environmental work so that you can use that information as you are considering your recommendations to the City Council. And you have time, because we're not asking you to make any recommendations until December, I think, so there's plenty of time to sit with that document. And we will also, if you would like, brief you when the final EIS is published, and just to kind of take you back through kind of what are the major findings, what are the things you might want to be considering. So that is the end of my report.
Yes, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. Are we still supposed to
Talking to your
be-
mic.
Oh, sorry. Are we still supposed to, or not supposed to, but can we still provide more feedback on the document, or is that done and we're just waiting for
The comment period is closed, and so we now need to take the comments and respond to them and produce the final EIS. So that's the phase we're in now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, next up, we have the Redmond zoning code rewrite. So this is more on the annual code cleanups. And to work on this, we have Kim Dietz.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
I apologize that I can't be with you in person this evening as I'm not feeling well, but I hope I do a very good job coming through to you virtually. So during your last meeting, which was in September, you held a public hearing on the package that is before you, amendments to the zoning code, and there are also amendments to the municipal code included in that package. You heard some comments. I just wanted to note that you heard an additional comment this evening, even though the verbal portion, I believe, was closed at the last, on September 27th, the written portion was left open to this evening. So I just wanted to share that as just a point of order with you, and would love your feedback when we get to that item on the issues matrix. So I'm going to share the issues matrix on my screen. There are a few items that are left open, and I just want to make sure that you are seeing the document.
Yep, we're good.
Thank you. Thank you. The first item regarding fences, that one has been closed. That was closed on the 27th. All the other items are remaining open. So the first of those is beekeeping, and this was raised by Commissioner Weston regarding the inadvertent interpretation of the code, and wanted to have more information about how to avoid confusion and potentially the eradication of native or pollinating species. So this was a great opportunity for staff to look at county, other cities, and state codes, plans, and guides that would support the city's animal code. Now, as a reminder, this is in the municipal code, so this was an item that was provided to the commission for reference only. But in that exploration, to answer the commissioner's question, we realized that there are some guiding documents at the state level that come into play and can be very handy in helping clarify how the city's code is implemented through our code enforcement officer. So on this page, on page 2 within your packet, I just want to point out that staff is recommending 2 amendments, or a small number of amendments actually, to clarify what has been provided in the technical committee's recommendation. So the first one was a correction to the code so that it clarifies and accurately represents the revised Code of Washington chapter. Okay, so we are showing that there. Then there was a recommendation by the county staff to allow for, on occasion, there might be a need for hives to be located indoors versus outdoors, and that could be because of inclement weather, as more severe weather might be coming forward. This provision allows that opportunity. I apologize, my dog is suddenly barking. I'll just try to proceed. And the final amendment is recognition of the state's Washington State Department of Agriculture Managed Pollinator Protection Plan and its protocols. This is the item that is going to support our code enforcement officers as they are responding to complaints in the field or concerns that our community might have regarding native bees, bees that are kept in apiaries, mason bees, just a wide variety. It ended up that when staff was researching this material, we realized that there are over 400 different types of pollinating species. And so this plan comes in quite handy in giving staff the guidance. So those are the refinements that staff wanted to bring forward to you this evening.
Yep, thank you so much for doing all this legwork. The Managed Pollinator Protection Plan is exactly what I was looking for. So with that included, I'm willing to close.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
The next item, Commissioner Aparna had requested that the comments provided during the public hearing be included. And the first one came from Mr. Morton, who's in the audience this evening. And his was mainly related to the CARA. The original recommendation that came from the technical committee involved creating a cross-reference. That was the limit of the recommendation from the technical committee. His testimony went into an area that was not within the scope. And so what staff has provided on page 4 of your issues matrix is a suggested roadmap during which Mr. Morton's comments will be addressed. The topics related to his comments will be addressed. These include Redmond 2050's Phase 2, the critical area regulations. You've already heard that there is a water plan coming before you, and there's additional work on many of our functional plans that will follow Redmond 2050's policy amendments. So those would be the times when the topics that Mr. Morton raised would be coming before the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Were there any additional comments in regard to this topic?
I'm sure there will be. We'll start with Commissioner Aparna.
Sorry, yes, sorry, Vice Chair. Yeah, I think this is great as long as we know that these are going to be addressed at the right time. I just don't want to lose sight of the CARA 2 especially. So I think it's a good thing. It's a good reminder for us that this is coming up. So you can deem it closed though. So thank you.
Thank you.
If I can add in one comment on this, just going through, there was a lot here. So thank you for going in the level of depth that you went in. Pieces that I'd really like to see called out when it goes further. First of all, I think the concern about the CARA 1 versus CARA 2 is that it's not clear from the information provided that there's any testing. So like the distinction really assumes that we're able to catch a spill or a mistake within that 5-year window. But I don't know if there's any testing or if it's more proactive or preventative. So getting clearer on how we are managing that risk would be really helpful in the difference between the two designated or the 2 banned uses versus the 20 plus banned uses for CARA 1. And then the other question that I had is directly, is there any plan to ban any of the prohibited land uses in CARA 2? So right now, there's a huge list for CARA 1, and I did not actually see that those are planned to bring over, just that there's planned study. So I really, it sounds like we're all concerned about the water quality, would like to make sure that there's protection there, but just how we're, like, it would be nice to know that there's actually a plan to consider bringing at least some of those forward, or else provide a different way of limiting that risk.
If I could, by carrying them forward or calling them out, will this be when they come forward? I just want to clarify in the commissioner's report that you will be presenting to the city council that as those items come forward, that these are the topics or the key questions that you'll be looking for answers to. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay.
Because I think that the point of concern on why there are so many forbidden uses in CARA 1 and so few in CARA 2, it's really about managing risk. If we're assuming that it takes some amount of time for these materials to actually reach the groundwater, just knowing that there's actually some way of noticing that there's a risk factor there is the part that's missing for me right now. And Commissioner Aparna.
Actually, if we are compiling a wish list, I think CARA 2, I would like to really look at it in greater depth, because if we are thinking that the wells, if we do predict that the wells may not recharge the way we need to, then CARA 2 needs double protection, because that's like our backup plan in a way. So we do need to have this brought forward. And so, again, that would be great if the report said, let's talk about this when the time is right, but the commission would like to call out these issues for a later date.
Thank you both. What I will do with these notes is I will reflect them in your report that will come to you next week.
Wonderful. Thank you.
The next item, if I can scroll to that. This one was mentioned this evening by Mr. Hubrath, and staff had responded to a request from Mr. Lawler and Ms. Kendall that they believed an inadvertent omission was made in the Northwest Design District when it was established as a design district by the city. So in this case, what staff is showing is where the specific use that they are interested in being allowed to fill within the design district would be allowed based on the city council's adoption. So ambulatory outpatient is shown here. It would have special regulations, mainly regarding the parking, so that the number of spaces would be adequate to meet the peak amount of customers and employees that would be occupying that land use. So this is consistent with some of the other uses, and as their study indicated, this type of use would have less demand than some of the other uses that are already allowed within the district.
Excellent. Commissioners?
I think we're good to go. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, I'm seeing nodding heads. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. The final item in your issues matrix was a question from Commissioner Van Nieman. And this was asking for further distinction between what is a minor amendment and what is a substantive amendment to the zoning code. I just wanted to take this opportunity to present not something that was adopted into the code, but something that we use on an operational level. And it identifies the different ways that the code is anticipated to be adopted. So that would include minor amendments like you are reviewing this evening. Then you have those that are related to standards and policies, some state legislation updates, for example. That is also something that we do on an annual basis because it's important for the state legislation, for city policy, and our development regulations to all be working from the same vision and to work in conformance with one another. Then on a 3-year basis, we would look at something more substantive. So outside of a rewrite schedule, but on a regular 3-year schedule, we look at something more substantive because that's about the time when the code as a living document might need to make those more substantive substantive changes. And then you also have maybe like a light kind of refresh, similar to the rewrite, but just a little bit less. And then finally, consistent with the comprehensive plans, periodic update to policies, you'd be looking at about a 10 to 15 year period where you need to do a more large scale update of the zoning code that you are also going to see with Redmond 2050. So the minor amendments, we talked about those last time, and this, just to reiterate, would be something that is consistent with policy, that it is maintaining current development standards, so what developers would anticipate the code requiring of new development, and then also to ensure conformity with state or federal laws, because those state and federal laws would have been already set forth, and the city is keeping in concurrence with those. So it's not a substantive update to the code. Then finally, those that are substantive would be those where you are looking at a significant change. So a change that is based on policy or operations. Those that also would be changing the way that development would occur. So it might be different design standards than what we would already have provided for in our code, or a different form of development, a different structure that would be required by the code. So those are the types of things that would be more substantive and would have in-depth analysis in order to bring them forward to the commission. Okay. I hope that was helpful, but are there any other questions regarding this item?
Commissioner Van Nymen, are you ready to close?
Yeah. We're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was the last item in the issues matrix. So I'd like to turn this back to the commission. I'm going to stop sharing. And the schedule that staff had initially proposed included bringing your report to you next week, so on November 1st, and that would mean that the commission would make a recommendation this evening.
Interesting. Are people ready to make that? Everything's closed? Yep, I think we are ready. So, point of order, how do I go about that, Glenn?
I'm going to defer to Jeff Churchill on that.
Thank you.
Hello, I have to come up again anyway, so good to be
Excellent.
back. But what the commission would do is the chair would entertain a motion to recommend approval as presented or as modified, whatever you've done through this process, and there would be a second, and you'd take a vote, and that would be it.
Lovely, thank you. All right, so in that case,
So so the changes that we've talked about and closed out in these issues, the issues matrix, become part of the new package inherently, or we are adopting those separately?
You would be making a recommendation based on the refinements that you have recommended as part of your issue matrix.
Okay, so it's one vote, and the motion is to make the recommendation to accept them as modified.
as modified tonight, yep.
Okay, so I move that.
Wonderful, thank you. Any second?
I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Wood here. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Lovely, thank you. All right, Kim, I think you're all set.
Thank you very much. It was an honor being able to work with you again. I look forward to more as you continue your work with Redmond 2050, and I look forward to seeing you next week with a draft of your commission report.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, and so now we are going to move back to Redmond 2050, the downtown and community design policies, specifically community design, and we are picking up with Jeff.
Good evening. Becky Fry has some well-deserved time off this week, and so My goal here tonight is to get us as close to the end of the first draft of these community design policies as we can. It would be great to finish them because your agendas starting next week are very busy through April, as far as we can tell. So we really would like to get to the end of these. So we're on page 3 of 19. No, I think we're on page 4, at the bottom of page 6. Sorry, the numbers keep changing at the bottom of my screen. So anyway, now we're at the bottom of page 6 at policy CC-22. That is where the commission left off at the last meeting. And this is in the section on building design. Go check that. Site and building design, general policies on site and building design. There are in front of us a couple more sections on site and building design for specific types of development. And then I think we still have the historic preservation also there's public realm policies. So there's still quite a bit in front of us. So I don't know if we will go through every policy, but maybe every policy where people have questions that they want to discuss or comments that they want to make. Because we do want to hear everything that you have to say.
Yeah, maybe we just start with CC 23 and people can flag. Do people have written notes if they want to flag as they move forward? Or do we need to just step into the policies as we go? Scroll through them? Okay.
Okay, CC 22.
So,
Commissioner Barna.
thank you, Vice Chair. So for CC22, I think it's well written. I think the only thing which I think is missing in this is when we talk about the natural environment and maintain the green character of the city, I think we should bring in resilience as well in this piece. So we talk about the environment, we should talk about encouraging resilience as one potential way, resilience being how things are built and how things are designed. And also my favorite theme, water. We talk about carbon emissions reduction goal. So we should also talk about water conservation. So that could be in the first line as well. So advanced carbon emission reduction goal, reduction and water conservation goals. I want to sneak in everywhere. So resilience and water is the stuff on 22.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Right.
Okay. CC23 is about landscaping and the character of landscaping. That policy exists in our current comprehensive plan. There are no edits suggested.
All right, looks like we're moving on. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Perna.
Sorry, 23, I don't know whether we want to talk about, I know we talk about water consumption, but water runoff and impervious surfaces for stormwater, since it's landscaping, so softscapes.
So perhaps under enhances water and air quality, we could include a segment on runoff?
Enhances, yeah, water yeah,
quality?
but it's not going to enhance water quality. It's more like it's going to drain the water better, you know? So I don't know if it's deserving its own line or clarifying that line.
Is the goal to encourage landscaping that infiltrates water into the ground?
Yeah, basically when you talk about landscaping, it can be pervious or impervious surfaces. So I don't know how you want to put that in, but it should be here because it's mentioned everywhere else from stormwater perspective.
Is your request that the policy talk about, so what you're saying is true, right? There's pervious landscaping, there can be impervious landscaping is the goal. What is the goal you want to reflect in the policy?
So the goal would be to make sure it's more pervious.
Okay.
Commissioner Sheffrin.
Thank you. Maybe just to clarify, is your goal to minimize pollutants into the groundwater?
No, it's to maximize groundwater permeation. So if you have
So if it's off-state.
gravel versus mulch, whatever, right? Water permeates differently.
Right, versus, so not to.
Right.
So it doesn't disturb the runoff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next policy is about compatibility between different kinds of uses. This policy has been updated to remove potentially exclusionary language, but to still get at the idea of compatibility.
Any comments? I think we're good. Oh, Commissioner Varna.
I am not sure about this at all. I understand the need to have something like this, but it seems like it's trying to do a lot of things. It doesn't want to be monotonous. It wants to have adequate light and air, but it should also talk about building heights. I'm not sure what it is trying to do here. So either we say in mixed-use developments or, I don't know. I just feel it's trying to do a lot, and some of this is already being done in other places. But I don't know if the rest of the commission agrees, so.
I think it's defining what development regulations do.
Okay, I don't know.
I think certainly something we can take a look at. I think that compatibility there's a lot of ways to address that. And I think that's why it feels like it's got a laundry list, because there's a lot of different ways that you can take a look at that.
Perhaps, I don't know. I'm just going to leave that open-ended, so thank you.
Okay, the next policy, the old number is DT11, which means it came from the downtown policies and now is living in a kind of a citywide section of the community design element. And it is the reason it was in the downtown element, or actually in the center's element, it is because it originated there. And the idea here is that it really doesn't need to be specific to downtown. It really is a policy that could apply in any valley setting, which is kind of, Redmond's got a bunch of hills and then it's got a valley. And so that's why it's proposed to move here. It doesn't make any specific height references anymore because it is broader, and so there's going to be probably different things that are appropriate in different contexts, but that's the idea here.
All right, we look good.
Okay. DT22 also has been moved from the downtown part of the center's element, and it's about streetscapes that are context sensitive. So it's been moved and updated a little bit. Part of the update is the last sentence that speaks to guidance from the Environmental Sustainability Action Plan, which will probably need to be in the glossary.
Right. I would actually recommend spelling that one out. It's a long name, but I think it's really good to get that clarity in here.
Okay. New section, site and building design policies for mixed-use developments. LU40, we're proposing to delete. It's actually a designation policy from the land use element. And remember, the designation policies are the policies that set up the land use designations on the land use map. So this policy literally creates the commercial designation on the land use map. Well, the commercial designation is going away and it's being replaced with the mixed-use designation. This policy really doesn't have a purpose anymore.
Right, I'm seeing nodding.
LU 39 is also from the land use element. And remember, when we went through the land use element, we identified a whole list of policies that would move into the community design element. So you're starting to see them here. And I'm sure we talked about some of them at the last meeting. LU 39 is about design of commercial areas. It has been revised to have more of a mixed-use focus because the zoning will be mixed-use zoning. And in fact, commercial zoning is already mixed-use zoning. When you get into the details, the name says commercial, but it's actually mixed-use zoning. So it's just proposed to be moved and refocused.
The only one that came up for me that I was wondering if it made sense to bring in here was some measure of how parking would work in these, because that to me seems like one of the make or break it components of how mixed use ends up feeling.
How parking would work, is that what you said?
Yeah.
So the second bullet point talks about where parking would be located. What would you want to see?
Like if you're not putting parking areas right in front or along the street, then it tends to either be in the building somehow, or you have a group of buildings that are then surrounded by, I'm just thinking like Totem Lake is a really good example of the like building center island in a sea of parking lots. That can be really hard as a pedestrian. So I don't know if that's something that you want to spell out a little bit more clearly here, or if it even makes sense to. But there is some sort of like pedestrian versus walkability, pedestrian walkability versus cars and parking tension here.
Sure. And so is the policy objective you're stating to ensure that it is a comfortable experience for pedestrians?
Yes, please.
When we're doing site planning? Okay. It may come up elsewhere, but I'll also put a note here so we can make sure that it gets addressed.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nope.
Okay, LU 63 is a lot like that commercial designation. There is a designation policy for design districts. There will no longer be design districts. There's not the policy doesn't serve a purpose. And there was a lot of text on that one. Okay, new section, design policies for site and building design for residential areas. So some of these come out of the housing element, some of these come out of the land use element. So we collected these from various elements as we drafted them. They're all related to design of residential areas in some way. HO 14 is really, the only change here is just kind of incorporate the Redmond 2050 themes. And this is a very kind of high level residential design policy. Very, very broad.
Is that a framework policy or is that?
It is not, but one conversation we've been having is that community design is going to need framework policies because it's a new element. And so this is one that could be at the level of maybe it should be.
It seems like it to me.
HO 15 is unchanged.
Right, we look good.
LU 10 is about special site standards that accomplish in the older version a wider variety of things. It's been streamlined, kind of, and it addresses specifically streetscapes and negative impacts.
Commissioner Aparna.
I was just wondering if this is related to, like, specifically we are talking about infill kind of development here. Are we calling out things which are, like, what would constitute a special site standard? Like, why would this be triggered?
It's kind of interesting terminology. I think this comes out of the section of the land use element that also dealt with compatibility. And so, but now it's kind of thrown into a new section, and so it may feel a little bit out of place, so we may need to work on that.
Okay.
Because the way that this is applied in the development regulations today, the things that are on this old, even this old list, things like emphasizing features typical of detached single-family dwellings, which isn't on the new list, but things like pitched roofs, single points of entry, those aren't specially applicable. They're generally applicable if you look in the development regulations today. So there's nothing really special about them. They're fairly generic. So I think the terminology is a little bit misleading.
Maybe update it or clean it up.
Yeah.
But I think also it could be applied to if we are looking at infill development, would that be a bit different than what we already have? Because, the way I look at infill, it will change how the neighbors are doing business or like living their lives, right? So maybe that's what we need to detail out here or somewhere else. Like, that's what I read here, but that, especially if we get the SEPA exception for infill, then we should have something which backs up how that could be done, right?
Yeah, so a focused infill might be more appropriate at this point, since most development is infill development in Redmond. That's a good point.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, public realm policies. So these are public realm being kind of that area between the building edge and the center of the street. Public realm could also include parks and plazas, other areas that are not kind of private property. CC3.
Commissioner Aparna.
I think CC3, we should use height, scale, massing, and intensity. That would change how things, you can still keep the views.
I'd also like more information. Why do we have downtown specific policies here instead of in downtown?
That's a good question. We propose putting it here because it is specifically design related. It would apply, this policy speaks specifically to downtown because that is the area where views of tree lines and hillsides are where they are. In Overlake, you're on the hill. So you don't have the hillsides per se. In downtown, you're in the valley, so you have those. Although, as I'm talking about it, it feels very similar to the policy that we looked at a couple pages ago. And so it might be worthwhile to take a look and see if those would be.
Flagging it and figuring out if it should be here or should be there or how to navigate that.
Number.
And if it's more about hillsides, then I'd rather see it just be about hillsides, but then that could get thorny because we have a lot of hills.
DT 11, okay. Interestingly, both DT11 and CC3 exist in the current plan. But maybe we don't need both. CC5 is an existing policy. It's been updated. The update is really just to have broader applicability across the city. The current policy says, including in the downtown and overlake neighborhoods. The revised policy would just be citywide.
Yep, I'm seeing nodding.
CC6 and CC7 go together. The proposal is to combine them into one, and the combined policy is the one that's shown at the top of the page. This again is about gathering places.
I had a comment on this one. Two things that I thought were missing in this list are seating. So whether that's something like benches or tables, like in the downtown park. And the other thing I would really like to see added is restrooms. And Commissioner Aparna.
I also think we have multi-seasonal attractions, but not all weather references. Like the idea that on a hot day or a rainy day, we are not catering to these community spaces. Variations in temperature should be there somewhere. So all climate or various climate or something, I don't know.
The attractions being kind of different attractions that could be enjoyed, a variety of attractions so that there's something that can be enjoyed in kind of all types of weather, all seasons.
All times of the year. Like there are umbrellas in the town center right now, but then they close it at a certain time. And if it's raining, too bad, you know. So anyway.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I would just maybe add lighting. And I don't know about wayfinding. I don't know if that's something that's relevant.
Okay.
Sorry, one more time.
Sorry. If you could go back, I'm not sure if we need the word techniques, but I read it. Oops.
So it could just be, this can include.
Does that still make sense?
Yes.
I think it will. Okay. CC8 and CC19 are combined into one. We haven't gotten to CC19 yet, but we will. So it's shown here in CC8, and it is about public buildings as community gathering places and models of sustainability. Sorry.
I think the second to last bullet should be, I don't know if it's development nearby transit stops.
I'm still on
Something about that
CC8.
isn't reading. Sorry, CC10.
Okay.
Development close to transit.
Yeah, there's like it doesn't
Or
quite read
develop
right.
nearby. Like I develop transit stops, create transit stops near development. Like I'm not exactly sure what it's saying.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the bikeways in here.
Okay, thank you. CC13, it's about distinctive entryways, no proposed changes. And these are like, it says entryways into the city. You'll notice the rest of the policy is really focused on some of these smaller signs and entryways that you see around the community.
I have a question. So, like around Redmond, especially the older developments, you frequently see that there's like a signpost at the end of the street. Would this policy prevent a neighborhood from taking down that signpost if they cared to?
Like a street sign?
No, the ones, they're like named developments. So the developer, when they built them in the 70s, named them.
Right, and put like
It was like an advertising
at the-
thing, like this is now for sale. Yep. So you see them all over Grasslawn, for example. It's almost street by street. Everyone gets a sign, but they tend to look fairly old. So they're probably at the point where they're either going to be torn down or else replaced. I just want to make sure that this wouldn't like create a city requirement that those signs have to be preserved, because
It wouldn't.
I don't
So
see
how
a
this has
purpose to
been-
that.
How this policy has been supported in the past is there was at one time a neighborhood matching grant program. It's not funded in the current budget, and it provided very small grants up to, I think it was up to $5,000. So small amounts of money for communities that had these signs or other kind of design elements that were entryways that they wanted to refurbish, wanted to re-landscape, wanted to keep in good repair. And so it could support that work, could match the either dollars or in-kind contributions from neighborhoods. So that's how it's been used in the past, but it wouldn't create this policy wouldn't create a requirement to keep those around.
Amazing. Okay, just checking. They are. Yep.
CC19, we talked about being combined with CC8.
Great.
CC24 is about design of trails, sidewalks, bikeways, and pathways. It's been updated, it's been streamlined, and we hope that it's clearer.
I was really glad to see schools called out there. The other thing that I didn't know if it made sense is religious facility, just because those tend to generate a lot of traffic at a predictable time of day.
CC25, we are proposing to delete and kind of have that content exist in the park plan. The park plan has a trails plan in it.
Any comments? Nope, we look ready to move on.
All right. CC26, it's updated, just a broader applicability instead of just identifying streets in downtown and Overlake. It's more generic, kind of streets with retail.
I would really like to see bike racks added to this list. Oh, Commissioner Sheffrin.
Jeff, sorry to interrupt. Can I ask just a general question? Because I don't know where this would fall or if this is something we've even talked about, just like kiosks that might pop up seasonally. Do you know what I'm talking about? To kind of invigorate the streetscape?
Like, well, it's just so we know that we're talking about the same thing. What would be like an example that you've seen in Redmond or elsewhere?
I mean, sometimes just like a hot dog stand or something of that nature, or ice cream kiosk.
Okay.
I don't know if that's specific, like disallowed, or I don't know where that would fall in this discussion, but it just came to mind. I don't know if it's prohibited. just don't want it overlooked, because I think it's, for so long, we haven't seen those here in Redmond, and I think it's been talked about for quite some time. So it would be even, performance art and that sort of thing. I don't know that that's outright discouraged or prohibited, but something else to consider.
One example to look at is Bothel's downtown. They have 4 like wood frame rentable, I don't even know what to call them. They're not exactly sheds, but they're all in a row. They're in an area with a lot of pedestrian traffic, and businesses can just rent them. So it's almost like an extremely mini farmer's market that's available to the community. It uses very little space, but it's just nice to have there. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to call it a shed in the notes. I've seen them. I know what you're talking about.
They probably have a much better name. I'm trying to
do.
describe them. They're painted. They're nice
Yeah.
for sheds. Commissioner Aparna.
For CC 27, I have a recommendation. Encourage active and safe, or safe and active urban streets. So towards the third line, encourage and safe and active. Because I think the street design should encourage activity, but it also should be safe, and especially when there are crossovers of different modes.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. All right, new section, historic preservation. All of the, well, I don't say all of them, but there is a historic preservation section in the comprehensive plan today. It's in the community character and historic preservation element. So many of these are existing policies from that section that are, so this is the other part of the element that's not really new. CC 27.2, all of these will get new numbers when we're finished, so we don't have decimals and whatnot, is an update to an existing policy about cultural resources.
So I had 2 comments on this one. So first of all, I would really like more specificity. I'm worried the tribal government, that phrase, isn't specific enough because it's not possible to look up.
Not possible to what? Sorry.
It's not possible to look up.
Oh, okay.
So being a little bit more specific about who we're talking about in Redmond would be amazing. And then the second comment is CC 48 later was deleted and said that it was rolled into this, but I don't think it actually was covered.
Okay, I'll make that note, and we'll see what we missed here.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay, CC 27.5, also an update to an existing cultural resource management policy. And I don't know that we've gone over this with the Planning Commission recently, but you see a reference here to a memorandum of agreement, an MOA. So there's a memorandum of agreement entered into by the city with area tribes after a find of cultural archaeological resources near Bear Creek. So that's what that reference is. And that was, I don't remember the year, but it's within the last 10 or 15 years. Probably not 15, probably more like the last 10 years.
Is that captured somewhere on the Redmond site? Is it a public document?
I'm sure it's a public document. I don't know if it's on the website. When we have a second, so I think 1, we can get it to you, and 2, when we have the second draft and we have some narrative, I'm sure that we'll talk about that in the narrative to provide context for these policies.
I would love more information on that, personally.
Again, that's background for 27.5. Okay, CC 28.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Parna.
I jumped to CC 30, so anybody before that for 28?
Just a moment.
So for me, I'm just wondering, when we say we acquire historic properties when feasible, I am not able to understand where the historic properties are that are already not identified. So for me, it's a question of, it's not a large city, and we've identified some. Is there a sense of where we might be acquiring these properties, and why this would require a policy unless there's some several identified but not acquired policies? I mean, buildings, properties.
I will ask Kim Dietz if we have what's in the zoning code. There's a list.
Right.
It's like a dozen or so, right? And typically, what you might have also is a survey that's broader and just kind of looks at what are all the buildings in your community.
Okay.
And so I'll ask Kim Dietz about what actually exists.
Okay,
I don't
because
know.
I'm just trying to understand if we need a policy for this, or I don't want to diss on the history, because that's not the intention here, but it's more like, this sounds like we want to establish a historic district of some sort. It's, pardon?
I said for buildings that don't really exist. Didn't we define this as 50 years?
I was going to say, I think this speaks to, as older properties age out, there's an opportunity for them to potentially become an historic property. So I think it's that longer time frame. As the comprehensive plan looks out 25 years, it's saying that as these, lands or buildings start to reach that threshold, they could be considered. And I think that's what that policy intends.
Is that desirable?
Yeah,
I don't think that's desirable.
One at a time, please.
Why do I want to keep a building from 1970? Like, that just doesn't seem.
my house.
50 years is, it is not the only criteria, right? It's like a threshold criteria. So buildings that have passed that point are the ones in the list in the zoning code. Just the one that comes to mind is like the Bill Brown building, and I forget which business is in there now. The city has no intention to acquire, it's not considering it, but what this policy says is if there's some properties or buildings that the community wants to make public, essentially, that there's a policy to support that.
I think we need a little more definition on what historic means and what historical significance means. Every old building is not, in my mind, when we have pressures of growth and land being scarce within our city, every old building does not deserve preservation. But there will be buildings which may be completely unremarkable, but completely significant to Redmond's history or Redmond's people's history, right? And that is significant. So if there are definitions, I'm hoping there are definitions of this, then it's okay. But if those definitions are not, they're ambiguous, then we need to define them clearly.
I would add that a couple of things. One is that acquiring a historic building doesn't necessarily mean keeping it in the same place. For example, there was a home in Southeast Redmond that was part of the old Campbell Mill, and that property has since been redeveloped and the home was not saved, but there was an effort to find a place to put that home, maybe in Marymore Park because it's close by and very large, but that didn't work out. So that's an option. And then the other one that's not, it's not kind of on the acquire, but I think just on the on the note of concern about, we have a limited amount of land and we have to be able to use that to accommodate people. There's also reuse of historic buildings, and a good example might be the Federal Reserve Building in Seattle, right? It's not in Redmond, but the facade of that building and the floors of that building, there's some elements that have to stay the same, but it's getting reused. And so there's opportunities to not only save facade, you can save facades, and you can even densify the land that a historic building is on. So there may be opportunities to accomplish both, but what I think I'm really hearing is an interest in hearing from Kim Dietz more about the questions you've asked. What is historic? What is historic significance? Why do we do historic preservation? What does it mean in Redmond? Like a lot of those questions.
Possibly how many properties are even affected. Because if this is truly a list of 10, then I don't think we're as concerned. To me, I don't read this and say everything under 1970 is fair game to keep, but just being clear, is this just a few things? Is there a defined list?
No, and again, historic significance could be even a 1970 building. But so we have to be very clear, like maybe there's an event in 1970 which changed Redmond, right? And you want to preserve that little piece of history right there and then, and that's okay. But we need to be clear about what that is and how we would define it and whether that's a moving target or not, right? Is there a cutoff date? Like 20 years from now, are we going to move that 1970 line to 1990, right? So we need to kind of have a sense of what that actually means.
Okay. I hear you.
1990 was just yesterday, okay.
It was 33 short years ago. Does feel like yesterday. Okay.
Point taken. Okay.
PC 31, excuse me. Existing policy updated. And it is about historic features, generally.
I think that's great. Anyone else?
Okay, CC 32. The whole section is about historic preservation, so this conversation is going to keep coming up. This is about identifying historic properties and how that happens. And very short, because it just references someone else's handbook.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Sheffrin.
Just a real quick question. If we insert the word historically significant, does that change the intent?
I don't know. It's a good question for Kim. I'll put it in here.
And I guess for me, that applies to the earlier topic or section as well.
Oh, I can't. Okay. CC 33 is proposed to be combined into CC 32. And it talks about maintaining and updating the inventory, which has been included in 32. (34) and 35 are proposed to be deleted and reflected in 27.2 and 28 respectively that we already covered. Do we want to go back? Do you want to go back and see what that looks like?
I don't think the specific United States National Park Service's Secretary of the Interior portion was carried forward, so if that's significant, we might need it in 27.2. If that's an actual requirement that we're tracking.
Okay.
I don't know what the legality is there.
Well, thank you for that. Put that in there. Let's see. So CC 35 is meant to be reflected in 28, and this gets to what is historically significant. So I actually do want to go back and look at 28 again. So what 35 is that we were looking at? What 35 has in it that 28 maybe doesn't is this idea of landmark criteria.
Commissioner Aparna.
I have a question, and this might be really stupid, so please bear with me. Is there a difference between a historic property and a landmark property? Or are they the same?
I'm going to let Kim Dietz answer for you definitively, but what I'll say, a landmark property is a property that's gone through a landmarking process and been landmarked. A historic property is going to be a broader set of properties.
And landmarks are the ones that should not be touched, whereas historic properties could be modified for a reuse. Is that how it is broadly classified?
I think landmark has a specific definition. I think historic is a little more nebulous.
Right, I would propose that we come back, we're at about 15 minutes, and I really, if we can, come back to that definition. We're so close to getting done.
We're very close.
So maybe we'll save the rest of the questions about historic and significance and landmark for later. Is that all right? All right.
Okay, 36 is about requiring owner consent for landmarking.
That seems wise. Has this ever come up as a problem?
It has been, for as long as I have direct knowledge, the policy of the city to require the owner's consent for landmarking. It's not that way in every community.
I know there were issues in Seattle around theaters, for example, which was like a counter. Yeah. So to me, this seems reasonable, but I'm curious if other people have opinions.
Surprise, you're a landmark.
Okay, 37 is proposed to be combined into 27.2 and 32. It's actually having the register. Uh, 38 is incentives for historic properties. It's been updated.
Looks good.
39 is proposed to be deleted. It's about encouraging emphasizing preservation through adaptive reuse. That idea is to be captured in CC 28.
Yep, that was captured in 28.
CC 40 is an existing policy about restoration and maintenance of historic properties. All right, CC 41 is about preservation of landmark properties. It's been updated, streamlined, but otherwise.
This is another one where I think we have a question about the definition of landmark properties before we commit public funds.
Okay. .42 is an existing policy about protecting designated historic landmarks from demolitions, so that is not every historic property. And 43, same policy for archaeological resources, protect them from adverse impacts.
I really appreciate this one. I agree. This is very important. Commissioner Sheffrin.
Thank you. Is there any mention, I don't know if anybody's mind there would be a distinction between something that would be considered historically significant and culturally significant in this context?
That's a good question.
A lot of
Tim's
cities.
going to have a lot of questions to answer.
Because a lot of cities,
Let's take it.
or some of the environmental documents that I've read, they make that distinction.
Great, thank you.
Okay. 44 is about mitigating adverse impacts. And it is intended to be reflected in 38. Forty-five is about compatibility of development near landmarks, adjacent to landmarks specifically.
Yep, I'm seeing nodding.
Sorry?
I'm seeing nodding.
Okay, good. Okay.
General approval.
46, regional cooperation is intended to be reflected elsewhere.
So this is one that I did not actually see also reflected in
Okay.
27.2.
All right.
The technical assistance piece specifically.
Okay, 47 is about having the city act as a certified local government to increase opportunities to seek grant funding for historic preservation, which is unsaid, but this is in the historic preservation section. So it's an existing policy updated.
I would love a definition here. So I have no idea what a certified local government is and how that differs from the city of Redmond's government.
I would expect the definition to be in the narrative that precedes this section. I can't actually tell you what it means. 'Cause
Yay.
in the context of
Great.
historic preservation, I don't know.
It's noted in the glossary of the comprehensive plan.
Could you fill us in?
Oh, is it?
I can read it to you.
Amazing.
Certified Local Government, CLG, a nationwide program of financial and technical assistance established by the National Historic Preservation Act to help local governments preserve historic and cultural resources as assets for the future. In Washington, it is implemented and administered by the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. Responsibilities of a CLG include maintaining a historic preservation commission, surveying local historic properties, enforcing state or local preservation laws, reviewing National Register nominations, and providing for public participation in historic preservation activities.
Okay, that really helps. So what I would recommend for this one then is to specifically call out either the federal program or the state department that we would have to work under. Just because that clarity has been so helpful other places in the document.
All right. 48 is intended to be reflected in 27.2. This is about sharing survey and inventory information with others.
And this was the one that I did not think was captured.
Okay, we are, I think, on the second to last page now. 49, proposed to be deleted. And contained in 27.2, and a policy that's below here that we'll get to. But this is about working with others to develop preservation programs. The new policy is promote in partnership with the community and organizations, local history, and the historic built environment, as economic tourism opportunities for people living in and visiting Redmond.
Commissioner Aparna.
I don't think the CC 49 has an educational component to it and a way of celebrating history. This one turns it into an economic kind of endeavor, which may, I don't know whether it is relevant or not, but it is not the same, it is not the same intent. So personally, I would say that having CC 49 and tweaking that is better than what is written in New 06, but unless there is a, I don't know, has somebody done a study where said there's a definite economic market for the buildings, the historic buildings in Redmond? I don't see the value of this policy. We can tweak CC 49 and get the same outcome, but it'll be more resident driven and more pride of place.
I deeply agree with that. Commissioner Van Nymen.
Yes, I don't like this economic tourism concept at all. Like, it's not, it's really missing the point.
Is your mic on?
It's missing the point.
Right. And if I could add on this, I would really like to see Redmond's archaeological history added to this, because I think that's way more interesting than our historic built environment.
I agree.
Personally.
You're not supposed to say that.
They're both interesting in their own ways, but I would like to see the archaeological piece added.
And cultural.
Commissioner Sheffrin.
And then I would just add cultural.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, CC4. Redmond's heritage as a farming community. We had a lot of discussion about this, and our recommendation is to delete it, as that period of time is relatively brief in Redmond's history. And it felt out of proportion to call it out like this in this policy.
I personally strongly agree. Anyone else?
I have a quick question.
Commissioner Woodyear.
Where is the Redmond's farming community located? I'm trying to remember, think back, where do we have farmland?
So there's some farmland up in Overlake. In fact, there was a chicken farm until not that long ago, at 148th, where so kind of the north part of the Microsoft campus. Also down here in the valley, around the Bella Bottega area, there was, I want to say it was Berry Farm, so it could have been other things too. So in different parts of the community.
In Bear Creek and Happy Valley, which is the Evans Creek area as you go towards Fall City. Those are all farming communities. And there's a couple historic towns within the current city limits of Redmond. I'm kind of passionate about the subject. I could talk about that offline.
We should do a tour. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we are down to the last two here. CC11, supporting community events. We took out the names of specific festivals. That's one of the updates, since those tend to change. I mean, some have happened for a long time. Maybe Derby Days is the exception. It should be named, but at least in this first draft, we did not name any specific event.
Commissioner Aparna.
Okay, this one's for the commission. I like CC 11, but is it just me, or would we prefer it to be just community and cultural fests as opposed to religious fests? I bring this up because there is a very fine line, and right now I know that the festivals cross over, and And I don't know what it is that we desire it to be. Like, it can be everything, or it can be just cultural, but without the religious component.
Can you give examples of the religious component that you're seeing in this?
Okay, it's going to get me in trouble with the Indian community, but the big Ganesh festival, which was there in downtown Park, it crossed over to religious side from cultural side. As an Indian, I personally was not happy about it, but I know that there was a heavy religious component to it. Now, apparently it is okay, currently, as things stand, but it is a decision for the community whether we want those crossovers. We should be very clear. If it's allowed for everybody. But if it's not allowed, or we want to draw the line, where do we draw that line, right? Would we allow prayers over there? We do allow prayers over there right now, and prayers were a big component of that festival. Much as we would like to think it was about the food and the colors and all of that. I don't know. It's a question I ask. I have my personal opinion on it, but leave that aside.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Who hosted the festival?
It was hosted by, I don't know, that there's this Indian group.
Because I feel differently about things hosted by the city of Redmond versus a public space that any community group can use.
It is hosted by one particular community organization. So it's not hosted by the city. That's clear. So the question is, how far would it be okay or not? If it's okay, it's fine, but it has to be okay for all, and that should be clear here. Or we preclude all such prayer religious activities and keep only the cultural component. I know it's a tricky one, but it's something that it has bothered me because I like the cultural piece of everything. I like going and partaking of all the cultures, but I do have a problem, especially when I come from India and I know how this thing sneaks into everything, okay? It's not a bad thing, but it is in your face in the sense of if somebody else could get offended by it. Okay.
So
Commissioner
what
Van Nymen.
what she was saying is that when you've leased the space from the city, all you've done is lease the park. The city is not affiliated with the event.
The city knows that there is a religious. Apparently, the city has to be notified if it's there's a religious component, because I think there is some amount of police and fire presence required if it is so in the current scheme of things. So they are notified of it. I don't know whether I'm making too much out of it because it bothered me personally.
So that was the first thing I was going to say is, you have to distinguish between the events that Redmond is sponsoring and the events that it just happens to be on Redmond City space. Then they've gotten permits to be there.
Right.
But what I would say beyond that is that, the lawyers, the City of Redmond lawyers are, there are constitutional issues involved in these types of things, right? Like you can't deny people access to space for religious reasons. So
but it's
I would say this is
public space. So for me, a public space will have a boundary. Now, I don't know if that is true or not, but anyway, I just brought it up.
the lawyers know.
Okay.
I think these are good points. And I think it sounds like there's not consensus, particularly on this particular one, but it's good to bring up. I do think that there's a line that Redmond shouldn't be hosting religious events, like as the host of the event. So, for example, when I moved here, it was well before Redmond Lights started. So moving that community celebration to something that was much more inclusive, encompassed a lot of different traditions, and many of them religious, at a time of year when like everyone wants to celebrate, I thought that was lovely. And it's still, as you're moving through it, there is still definitely a religious bent to a lot of the community displays and like the music, et cetera. And I think just your point earlier where it's, we want to make sure that it's open to everybody.
Yes.
It's inclusive.
I think that
is very
that
important.
is where I have an issue, but it's just probably me wanting a more secular kind of approach to everything, but, well, you know, we can't cherry pick it. So, you know, if it is what it is, but yeah.
Thank you. No, it's completely valid to bring up. It's the right time to do it.
Is there information that we can bring to the commission for future discussion that you're looking for on this matter? Like the summary of the First Amendment issues from the city attorney, like that would be one thing. But is that something that would be useful to the commission for the future or not? Or other things?
I think it's okay as it stands right now. I mean, it's broad enough. Or maybe we can add the word encourage and support community festivals or events that are inclusive and reflect the diversity so that nobody is excluded from any of these events. We could, so it's like community festivals or events that are inclusive and reflect. I think that would do the trick, right?
Mm-hmm. I had sort of a separate nitpick. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Sheffrin. Okay, yes, we'll come back to you in just a second. So a slightly different sector of this. I was wondering how people felt about adding the word current to encourage and support community festivals or events that reflect the diversity, heritage, and cultural traditions of the current Redmond community. And the only reason I'm suggesting that, and this is a little bit pedantic, well, no, I actually don't even mean it that. I'm going from 2023. I feel like city traditions have a way of getting stuck, not evolving. Like they have a way of, once they're there, it is really hard to get rid of them, even if they're not really suiting the current needs. And I think Redmond's done a really admirable job of evaluating that over the last 10 years, and it's something I'd really like to see the city continue to do. But I'm wondering if adding current Redmond community would specify in policy that we really want it, like we see this as a moving target, not stuck at a point in time.
I like that. I'll also take this as an opportunity to plug the So Bizarre that hasn't happened in a long time. I liked that.
Oh, me too. Commissioner Sheffrin?
The only question I have is there a reason why we say or events as opposed to and events?
This question got asked before, not in this context, but throughout the plan we use or as inclusive, not exclusive.
Does everybody feel okay with that? Okay. Thank you.
Glenn? Oh, thank you. Commissioner Whittier.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to kind of build off of a comment that Commissioner Aparna mentioned about, inclusivity and the component around religious. If we're going to be thinking about religious, should we also be thinking about political? We live in a very, very sort of politically charged environment. So as we're thinking about these events that are inclusive, religious is one component, but I would also argue that politically charged, politically events can also be divisive.
Very good point. Everyone's nodding along here.
I think the language that you're talking about in the policy is fine. I think if you start wanting to add words like religious and political to the policy, which I haven't heard, then you'll want to get a good summary of First Amendment implications. All right. Thanks for that discussion. Appreciate it. We ready to go to CC 12?
Yep, last one.
Okay. This is about recreational and cultural programs, and it is no proposed changes.
Any feedback? Everyone says it's fine.
Okay.
Commissioner Whittier, are you still?
No, my hand won't go down for some reason.
All right.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Lovely. Thanks.
Okay, that is the end of the downtown and community design policies for the community design element. You're actually going to see this again in, you're not going to see these policies again in December, but remember the community design element includes a lot of different things. So the next time you see the community design element, you're going to see it with narrative. You're going to see it with the overlay policies that you looked at a long time ago, because center stuff shows up in here. And you're going to see it with the Marymore Village and Southeast Redmond policies. So that's the next time you're going to see it, but you're going to see it as a document that looks like an element. So, and I think that's in January, I could be wrong, but in a little while.
Great. Thank you. Great work, everyone. All right, next up, we have staff and commissioner updates.
Good evening. Just a couple of reminders that for the last 2 months, November and December of this year, that our planning commission meetings are shifting. So the next meeting is next week, November 1st. You'll be seeing your packet on that on Friday. So just as a awareness of that. And then the next meeting after that is November 15th. And there's also a public hearing on the housing element. And for December, the meeting is December 6th and December 20th. And I believe December 6th also has a public hearing. So, and otherwise, these are very full agendas too. So we encourage commissioners as they can to please attend. We have a lot of Redmond 2050 items that are trying to work through there. So I appreciate everyone's time and ability to join on the schedule. Thanks.
Any commissioner updates? I had one. So I actually took the short course on local planning today from the Washington State Department of Commerce, and it was a little bit long, maybe 3 hours, but really useful. Sorry, 3 hours probably doesn't seem long to the planning experts.
You don't want to see the long version.
Right. Short is good. But I just wanted to plug that there's another one on November 29th. And if you haven't taken that before, you'd like a refresher, I thought it was really useful. All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Great. Thank you, everyone.